Well, then I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. We are having a special school board meeting to look specifically at the reopening of school plan. As a reminder, while special school board meetings are open to the public, and we Mason Web TV is kind enough to be streaming this particular meeting for us, we do not have a public comment period. So this will be a meeting in which members of the cabinet will present their reports, and school board members will have a chance for discussion and questions. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Dr. Postel, I guess I will be turning it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sally. Well, first of all, Happy New Year to everybody. And we're here this afternoon to share with you a plan that we've mentioned to you in a school board meeting on November 10th. We know that any plan of this nature could be modified to meet the circumstances that at some point in time are changing. But what we want to do is just present the plan in detail in a summary format in terms of opening our schools on January 25th. And then at the end of these presentations, we're going to turn it over to the board for questions. And if you have any questions specifically to anything that our cabinet members are talking about in their individual reports, of course, feel free to ask the questions. But we're going to try to make this as efficient as possible, and yet concentrate on the board's questions and ideas as it pertains to opening our schools on January 25th. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Neely, who will be discussing our plan overall and our instructional format.
Hi, everybody. It's so glad to see everybody back again. It's nice to feel normal. So Marianne is sharing it. Oh, she was sharing it. Is it there, Marianne? Thank you. So this is just going over again what we had already presented to you at the end of last year, meaning in November, December. This would be our blended model with the A and B schedule. So schedule A, Monday and Tuesday in person with half the kids. Wednesday through Friday, students would be with their asynchronous learning. And then students who are B, Monday through Wednesday, they're online with their asynchronous learning. And Thursday and Friday, they would be in class face-to-face. This is because we have the 6-foot distancing with all the safety protocols in place. Marianne, can you scroll down to the bottom with the chart, please? Marianne?
You're mute, Marianne.
I apologize. It should be on there. Can you see it?
No.
My apologies.
Here, I have everyone's put up, so if you want, I can just put up the one that's for all the presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert.
Yep.
Thanks, Robert.
You bet.
Technology. Gotta love it.
Robert will be screenshotting all the cabinet's reports.
You should see that now, and I will scroll down to where you're at. There you go.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, I see it now. Thank you so much. So again, these dates are flexible depending on what you all decide we're going to do. But if we have the target date of January 25th, that's our pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade students. They come back to the blended model starting on the 25th. Everybody else, the 5th grade all the way down, they would continue small groups if we can get enough buses and drivers to be able to do the small groups during this time. It impacts our bottom line with dollars. Plus, at this time, Holly wasn't really sure that we had enough actual drivers to pull off the small groups once we start bringing kids back. So then it's almost 3 weeks later, and we kind of went to the February 22nd date because we have President's Day weekend the week before that. So then on Monday, February 22nd, we would bring back 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, plus 5th, plus 7th. And then as you roll into the next 3 weeks, we would have everybody back. And that is right at trimester break, which is a good break for the secondary folks to be able to do that. The only thing that is a little bit different, we'll continue to use K-12. Teachers will introduce the skills, the concepts. If they're in a class that's like CTE, heavily based with that, they'll continue to use Google Classroom for that. The only difference that we have is when we move to this model at Evergreen, we're not going to be able to offer dual language to the students who stay at home because we only have a limited number of our Spanish speaking teachers that are able to do that. So what we are doing, we're in the process of doing this right now. We're offering families the choice. If they want to remain with dual language, they will need to do in person with us. If they do not and they stay 100% online, then they don't lose that EL support and instruction. We still have teachers that will be providing instruction for those students at home. It just won't be in Spanish and in English. It will have to be English only. So that is how we have it set up to start. Again, it's extremely flexible. We will again stay with K-12, mostly because that's where our kids are. We're in the middle of the instruction, and we'll be able to go move in and out of that instruction. Let's say if a class goes down and we have to close that class because of COVID exposure, then we can roll right into our curriculum again with seamlessly. So that is what I have to present.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Kelly at this time? Or do you want to save them towards the end? Whatever you'd like.
I think it'd be good to maybe ask questions as we go along. And then of course, if we have more questions at the end, then that would be appropriate as well. So does anyone have any questions for Kelly?
I did. And this comes from just my experience of having my daughters, working through online schooling right now and seeing how that's going. I was reading, that when they're going to be face to face, they're going to be getting the instruction. And then primarily when they're on their own, that's when they would be working through the assignments. And just from watching my own children, both of those need assistance. So would there be somebody that they would be able to plug into on those online only days to help with, because I know that they can get instruction, and then what ultimately ends up happening with things like math is they may not understand how to work through a more complicated problem. And would there be somebody on hand to bounce that off of, or are they on their own when they're in those days, or is that kind of dependent on the school and the class and the situation?
That's a great question, Carrie. In this model, Wednesdays would be the easier day for the kids to be able to reach someone because everybody is asynchronous that day and the teachers are all there. Those other 2 days that the students have, they are for the most part on their own, depending on the model that we choose, whether we're able to use specialists or not to be able to assist in that. Our preference is that they do have somebody that they can contact, obviously.
Right.
But at this point, our teachers are pretty much all engaged in teaching at that time, and it will be difficult for them to be able to reach someone.
Okay, that's what I wanted to understand. I know that the ideal situation that what people want is to have that assistance and that instruction, but we just may not have the ability to do that, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, we are stretched very, very thin with being able, because numbers, you can't, in a perfect world, we could draw up the numbers and make it all even and make sure each teacher had this many kids, but that's not how it works. So at this point, yes, the students are really on their own, unless we can get some additional help.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think as we move into this program, if we were to move into this program, we would monitor and adjust as we moved forward. And if we could provide additional support for families and for our students, we would do that. And that's why we would have to monitor things very, very closely. And if we saw that the need was tremendous, we would have to make some adjustments to make sure that we were supporting our kids.
So I guess I have a follow-up question to that then. When you say above and beyond, we're stretched thin, we need more resources. Is that above and beyond some of the resources that are outlined in the rest of the plan?
Marianne, I believe will address some of that, Sandy, but yes. So for instance, at one of our schools, we have several teachers who are qualified. They'll need to stay home, and we're going to need additional teachers for those spots as it is. So yes, it goes above and beyond. Brenda has tried to help us out the best that we can, but until we have a solid decision and know exactly when we're coming back and what we can do with the help of the union, all we know is that it will cost our bottom line.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sally?
Yes, I just wanted to verify this. This is the same plan that we've had since September.
Since November.
Since
Yeah, since this is the plan that we presented in a board meeting on November 10th.
Yes, Sally, I've presented it a couple of different times. It's what we started out with coming out of our the big planning meetings where we had separate individual subcommittees. And this was work of the subcommittee. So you're right. It originated back in this summer in the fall, and then we did the official proposal to you guys in November.
Right. And much has changed since then.
But if you really think about it, Sally, this is very consistent with the direction that we received on December 16th
Yes.
from the state, bringing back students rather slowly, starting with the younger children. So at this point in time, anyway, it's very consistent with what the governor and what Superintendent Reichdahl have directed us to do.
One thing that has never made sense to me on this plan is this. When you go to February 22nd, and you have students coming back, and I think some of the reasoning, like the 6th graders, the 5th graders come back. Let me see. I'm trying to think of our grade levels anymore. The 5th and 6th are in the same building.
Yes.
And so we have one grade level coming back. The 7th and 8th are in one building, so we have one coming back. But then at the high school level, we don't have anybody coming back. And choice.
So at the high school, Sally, to help with that, students are mixed in their grade levels with the teachers. So if I have an economics class, I might have freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors all in that same class. So there's no way possible to be teaching with the 3 freshmen that show up that day and everybody else is still online. It's not possible to do that. So we tried every configuration possible. We cannot just bring back freshmen or sophomores because they have classes that are on all different levels.
The other thing too, along the way, these small groups, depending on where we are with the vaccines and with COVID in general, they could increase as we move forward. from where we are right now. We could bring back more of our students at each one of these grade levels.
And also that the high school students cannot start returning until our number is below 200 per 100,000, which is not a level that we've yet obtained. And in fact, I just received numbers from Mason County today. We had 50 new cases, and now we're back above 300. So.
Well, Robert, that's changed to a regional level now, right? Instead of a county-wide.
Not for schools, not for bringing
Oh.
students back. That's not changed.
That's
for
different.
opening.
Okay.
That's for opening businesses and for sizes of events and so forth.
Okay. I did have a question about the state guidelines, Alex, that you were talking about. Now, are they specific to this type of a hybrid where it's split days, or are they just saying you can bring, I mean, I've never been a fan of this type of hybrid because I just don't know that the burden matches the benefit. Like, I don't think that 2 days and then our kids are actually losing 2 days of instruction really pays for the benefit of having 2 days of instruction. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And we've heard from our teachers that they have a belief that, going to this kind of a hybrid model, and we'll get to this as we go through the discussion this afternoon, they believe that we're better off sticking with what we're doing. It's better for most students, not all, because we know some students are not benefiting at all from distant learning for a variety of reasons. But there are teachers, and there's many of them, that believe that we should probably stay with the current model rather than to go to the hybrid model with the same concerns that you have.
I guess that's, I just don't know that even for the kids who I really want our kids back in school. I mean, I think we've all said that and we're all really clear about that. But my concern is just 2 days, I feel like it's gonna be more of a burden on families to try to coordinate, 3 days at home and childcare and all of those things. But I guess what I'm asking though really is the state specific that you can't bring back full, PK through first grade, like all kids?
So Lynn, we have to maintain the spacing of the kids. So none of that has changed. And so we don't have literal space to be able to do that. We can only get half in at a time. Some of the smaller districts that have, 15 kids in a class to begin with, and their classrooms are fairly large size, that's the difference. But this does match the rollout of the state with bringing them back gradually, and this is the best that we can do as far as space goes.
Because they have those restrictions of space.
Yes.
Okay, that was clarifying what I was asking.
But Lynn, you brought up a very good point where there's a lot of people that believe the same way, and quite honestly, it presents a real challenge for our staff and for our families, because you've got kids coming to school 2 days, you've got planning time involved there, whether it's every day for a certain amount of time, and you release the kids early each day so teachers have planning time. It's still very cumbersome any way you cut it, no question about it. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay.
All right, I think we're ready to move on to instructional program.
Okay, thank you. Mary Ann Marshall.
All right, so been working closely with our building administration on putting together this plan. So when we look at the budget, we know that bringing students back in a hybrid model is going to cost us some money. So that would include things like training staff, what materials do we need, and what we know about the situation that we find ourselves in is this is a constant moving target. So there's going to be budget implications that come up that we can't be prepared for. So in order to move forward, it's just continuous conversation between the buildings, the district, Brenda and Dr. Apostle, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and buildings and staff and students have what they need. And of course, when we come to budget, we're going to also need to talk about certificated and classified staff. Now we're going to have to fill those holes for the teachers that will be teaching online only. And like Kelly said, right now we have one building that we will have to fill 2 additional certificated staff. And I just found out today, we do have another building that will need to fill the holes of 5 certificated staff. So of course that's going to impact the budget. And as we move along, we have teachers still continuing to qualify to work from home. So again, it's a moving target. When we talk about classified staff, it's really focused in on special education as well as that supervision piece. And so as you could see in the report, I laid out exactly how many hours a day our buildings are going to need to make sure that we have proper supervision before and after school. And when we talk about our elementaries, our pre-K1, when they come back, we're going to be having recesses. We're going to be having lunch. So that's definitely going to impact the budget as well. I know Robert will touch on this in his portion of the report, but there also is going to be an increased custodial need. We're going to need to be cleaning surfaces a lot more. Robert had shared that, like in the lunchroom, we're going to have hand washing stations. We're going to need to have a custodian there to make sure that the water is filled for those stations. That's a cost we haven't had before. And as you see in the report, it lays out where we're going to need extra custodial support. Food service, right now, our building administration has worked with food service, worked with their custodians to make sure that we have proper social distancing in place and ready to go for when our students do come in to get meals and are served. Transportation, we know when it comes to busing, we're going to have smaller sizes of students on our buses. So we're looking at 20 students per bus, anywhere from 20 to 23. Now, at the elementary level, we deal with transfer buses. So that's another custodial cost, because when those students get off the bus, we're going to have to now disinfect that bus before those new students get on the bus to be transferred. Instructional program needs. So right now we have no additional curriculum needs at this time, other than providing teachers with time to plan for this transition. And like Kelly shared in her part of the presentation, we're going to continue to be using K-12. As far as activities and athletics, that's not applicable at this time, but right now under other, we are working with the Y. Right now they're housed at Bordeaux Elementary. Well, when we come back into a hybrid model, they're not going to be able to use that facility. So we're working closely with the Y right now to find a separate location so that we can continue those services for our families in the community. I have to say, we all want students back in the classroom. I think that's super important. But with this plan, our teachers, I know myself and Miss Neely, we're nervous about the lack of connection that our students are going to have on those 2 days that they're learning asynchronously. We're also really disappointed that we're not going to be able to provide a dual language model for students at Evergreen Elementary online. We're really passionate about that. We want to move that program forward, but in this hybrid model, it's just not possible.
So what you're hearing, folks, is that there are some detriments to the hybrid model that Lynn has mentioned, and it's also based on what we're dealing with COVID and keeping things clean and being aware of where COVID is. It's extremely expensive, and it's beyond our current budget. So we're hoping down the line, and you'll hear about this as we go forward, that we get help from the federal government and from the state, but there's no guarantee to that. But as you can tell, it's a costly effort to implement the hybrid model at this point in time. Thank you, Marianne.
You're welcome.
Questions for Marianne? Lynn?
So you know, in December, Governor Inslee and Reichel talked about having additional funds that were set aside for bringing kids back to school. But I think it was only like 3 million for the whole state. I mean, Brenda, maybe you can speak to how would we have to spend the money first and then get reimbursed? Is it similar to that, or do you know much about that?
Actually, we have not received any further information on that funding. So at this point in time, we don't even know if it's going to be available.
And we've not seen any extra money either.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I
Any,
would just like to ask a clarifying question.
sure.
Marianne, you talked about the hours listed on this chart. So if I understood correctly, like under Bordeaux, that would be 50 hours basic ed every day,
Yes, ma'am.
staff hours, and
Yes, ma'am.
1.5 hours of special ed, and then so on and so forth for each school. And that's what that indicates, correct?
Yes, ma'am. And at this time, our buildings don't currently have any supervision time. So all of these numbers add up to additional cost. That's different than special ed, and I can let Jenny speak to special ed, but right now these supervision minutes that fall under basic ed, we don't have them currently right now. So this would be additional.
Robert, can we put the screen up for those needs at the schools?
Needs at the schools.
Yeah,
Under
Hours.
classified staffing? Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I think it's under the classified staffing part
Okay.
of that chart.
There we go.
There we go. There we go.
And that's what you were referring to, right, Sandy?
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And
So,
this,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and this is following, you know, the state guidelines. So I guess in the back of my mind, I'm like, why would the state lay out guidelines that are going to channel us all down this path that's unfavored and so costly, instead of allowing us to do something alternative? And I guess I'm not asking the right people that. That's just a question coming out of my mouth. So,
But if I can piggyback on that, to be honest with you, I mean, I've got 2 children in this school system. And as a parent, every survey that's come out, my husband and I have both said that we would send our children back to school. And that is also my children's choice. They would like to go back to school, even if it is just 2 days. I am confused about how other schools in this state have already been doing this. How is it that this is I know every time we meet, we talk about these challenges, but other schools have been and are doing this in the same environment. I know schools down south, whether it's Vancouver, Longview, Centralia, Chehalis, they have done this. Schools east side of the mountains, they have done this. And even though, I mean, my own daughter took a survey and she was looking at that survey and she's like, Mom, I don't like either one of these choices. But given the 2 choices of staying 100% online or being able to go back into a building to see actual people, she would choose that. And that's where I'm coming from. I have children in this school district. I am living this. It is painful as parents to go through this. So I feel for all of the parents in our community as we go through this. And I know that these are difficult and challenging times and challenging decisions. But I mean, when we do these surveys, we have something like 70% of our parents are choosing to want to go back to school. And I just keep feeling like, how can this be that we're the only school district that is feeling like this is or it's being presented that it may be too great of a challenge when other school districts are doing it. I have to say that.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
I have one more about hand washing stations. Now I realize we may want to keep some mobile to use in different locations, but is there any thought to
think we lost her.
Yeah, Sandy, we can't hear you at the moment.
Connection's getting unstable. I'm going to turn off video.
And you're muted now, so if you're talking, we can't hear you.
No, my question was just about whether or not any of
You're kind of cutting out, Sandy. Can anybody hear Sandy?
No. And you're back on mute again, Sandy. So we only heard your question is about, and that's about as far as we heard.
Okay. Could any of the hand washing stations be plumbed? How about we just go on?
Robert, can you respond to that?
Yeah, the hand wash stations are we're planning to run hot water to them for the purposes that they'll have tempered water, so they're not cold. But they will not be plumbed for waste. And so there's a gray water tank that after so many hand washes, a custodian will be taking that to a custodial closet to a mop sink and dumping them.
That's right.
What would it take to plumb them, Robert?
The cost would be prohibitive to do that, and the thing we'd be able to take up concrete and everything, because we'd have to have proper flow for that to happen on a gravity system, and we can't run them across walkways or anything. For a temporary solution, we would do a lot of damage and incur a lot of cost. So even though there's a labor cost for that, it's still better than what we would have to do to do waste. No, like do hand washing.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Hey, Marianne, I've got a question. Excuse me. I'm just looking at those numbers there as far as, what the schools are needing in terms of certified support. I'm noticing that several of the schools have quite a few more hours than some of the other ones. So for example, OMS is, which now I've just lost the page I was looking at. OMS is needing about 20 basic ed hours, whereas like the elementary schools in Oakland Bay are needing, closer between 40 and 50 hours. Is there a reason why there's so much disparity there?
Yes, ma'am. It's because OMS doesn't have recesses.
Okay, and then we've got Oakland Bay though as well, who's also at two grades needing, almost more than double what OMS is. Is there? I'm just trying to understand why there's such a difference.
Yes, ma'am. So it's a way, we all have been to Olympic Middle School and seen it. It's the layout. And so that team sat down and was able to map out their supervision with only needing the 20, what was it? Let me pull it up here. The 20.5. And they were adding additional hours onto the staff that they already have to kind of help. So they were trying to do as much as they could with what was already there. When we look at OBJH and the layout of OBJH as far as lunches and what it would take to do that and to provide supervision both before and after school and during lunches, that's the number that OBJH had submitted.
Okay, thank you. All right, so any other questions for Marianne, or are we ready to move on to look at special ed?
Yeah, I'm just wanting to revisit some of this. I mean, because I know that some of our schools have more small groups in them than others. And I'm just curious, have we had, whether it's through virtual or even people going into those buildings, have we had some of the other schools go to see best practices in schools that have been doing this right in our own school district? Because I believe OMS has more students in it than any other school, and they've done a really good job with their small group situation. I don't know if I've heard as much from the other schools, and are people able to go in and see and get more of a comfort level with that in-person small group instruction so that they can visualize and see what's going on with that? And then my second question is, have we gone out and either talked to other schools that are doing the hybrid situation, because there have been many, or have we not reached out to any other school districts at all?
Great question. So yes, our buildings have talked with Olympic Middle School. We've seen what they're doing. However, we were placed on pause to add additional students to come in for small groups. So our buildings are looking forward to moving forward with growing those small groups and are prepared to do that. Our elementary principals actually, I believe it was yesterday, met with, I believe it's the Chehalis School District that's somewhat, it's very similar to ours, and they have a K2 building, and they've been going in person, and I could be getting this wrong, since October or November. So they were looking at, okay, what are you doing and how are you doing it? And they learned a lot about how to make this successful, and are still going to continue to reach out with that school district and their team to learn from them on how to do a hybrid model successfully.
Great, thank you very much.
Yes.
All right, so I think we're ready at this point to move on to special education.
Okay.
Greetings, everyone. So you're going to hear basically the same thing about staffing from me that you heard from Marianne as far as special education is concerned. I do have the typical things that we would see in any normal school year, someone on leave for maternity leave, medical leave. We generally can cover that in-house for the special education pieces of it, and then have a sub for the actual student instruction. So that's going fine. I do have an elementary and a middle school level functional academics teacher that will not be able to, well, two teachers that will not be able to come in person. We have that covered with one person working remote and one person in school. So we're splitting up those groups, hopefully into the younger kids into one group and the older students into another. At the middle level, we're working with the paraeducators right now are working in person with students while the teacher is zooming in, and that's working fine. So that will continue that way. High school, same thing. I have a teacher working from home that's been able to zoom in. When we come back in person, we're going to have a classified person in-house to help be with the students to cover that. As far as paras are concerned, the main thing that we need to beef up are one-to-one paraeducators, and we're able to split the kids in between Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday to have one person cover both sets of kids. And the reason that's important this school year is I doubt that we will meet the threshold for safety net reimbursement to the district for those students for that extra staffing. So we're going to try and cover all the way across the board that way. The other time is really just that supervision piece of getting the kids in off the buses or from the family's vehicles and back out. So that's where we add the extra time, but that is a typical, not a different expense than we're used to. As far as working with custodial staff, preschool, that was a piece I want to talk about. Preschool is going to come 4 days a week as usual. Their split day will be Wednesday to be the same as everyone else instead of Fridays. So we staffed from the get-go for this school year, understanding this hybrid model could happen and that we wanted little people to be able to be here every day. So they are able to come every day with the spacing and the staffing level we're at for preschool. Custodial staff, though, will need to clean between groups, and we don't usually do that. So that's something that's going to happen for this to move forward. And then transportation, working with Holly for small groups and bringing kids in as usual. The rest of it is just the crowded classroom spaces. Special education classrooms generally have a lot of stuff, and some of that will need to be moved out to make sure that kids can be 6 feet apart when we come in. Do y'all have any questions of me? Carrie, I do want to say that I did talk to Chehalis today also. Although most of what they're doing is going well, I do understand that special education is not. And part of that is parents On the off days, those asynchronous days are opting not to participate in specially designed instruction. So kids are not getting as many minutes. So they're working on how to work that out. So I'll be watching what they do for that and chatting with them for that as well.
Thank you for that information. I can see how that would be a challenge.
Any other questions for Jenny? Sally, are we ready to move on?
I think we are ready to move on to human resources and staffing.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. Nice job. Terry.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you. Hey, we've had a couple changes most recently, and I wanted to talk about that and kind of focus on that, even though people have talked about other things. We know in terms of budget that there's staffing charges, and particularly, with our classified. I have some very specific concerns about our certificated staffing, and I wanted to share that with you. Of course, we've been out since March, and when I've talked with our SEA and I've talked with their leadership and heard from teachers, we really have a good team there. And you know that, and we know that these are people who want to come back and they want to teach. That's what they do. They want to see their kids face to face. But one thing that happened that was pretty radical and happened just recently is that we now have vaccines and people are getting vaccinated. And the association has asked a question relative to the MOUs. The MOUs are primarily about safety protocols to make sure that they're safe, our kids are safe, and those kinds of things. And the question they've asked is, if the vaccine is here, and we know that that would help keep everyone safe, why would we return on January 25th when right around the corner here, we're able to get vaccinated and come back and not be worried about COVID for ourselves and our families? That's a tough question. And what I try to do in all negotiations, and part of my responsibility is to take complex issues or questions and to make sure that we have a solid and a good answer. And I must be honest with you, to that question, I don't have a solid or a good answer because vaccines are very close. But I have never seen the level of concern as I have seen most recently. And I would go so far as to say that I would have had a different conversation with you before the holiday break. And something happened, and I believe what happened was people started getting vaccinations. And the other thing that happened was that our rising numbers, and people watch that every day, and Robert just reported on the numbers and what that has done most recently. And the number of people who are applying for assistance through their doctor, the CDC and state guidelines, that those requests come to me, and that has changed quickly. And frankly, I'm very, very concerned about being able to provide staffing when we go back. We know we do not have enough subs. We didn't have enough subs last year in a normal year, up until obviously when COVID hit, but we are not going to have enough subs. And there are serious concerns about the staffing. And I don't like sharing this, but I feel like I'd be negligent not to share it. The recommendation from SEA is that we wait, and this is a strong recommendation, not taken lightly and not meant to be trying to figure out how to get out of something, but out of a safety concern, SEA has made the recommendation that we wait until we are allowed to get vaccinated. And from an HR standpoint, I have a similar concern in terms of being able to provide enough staff and consistency of staff and frankly, safety of staff, as well as our students and others. That is not a popular thing to say. I understand that. I get it. But in all honesty, that's where I wanted to share that, because I think it is important. I think it's critical. And I wanted to share with you the concern I have about the staffing for all of our staff and our students. But we would be stretched from an HR standpoint, to be sure. There's no question about it. We already are, and it's going in a direction that I'm not, the number of concerns and it's going in a direction that I'm not comfortable with. So I wanted to share that. And that's really all I wanted to share from an HR standpoint. Everything else is being covered by a variety of people, but I did want to let you know that I have serious concerns about not just the cost, but more importantly, the safety and ensuring that we could staff our buildings without doing basically a boomerang in and out, back and forth. And that's all I have.
So Terry, having already seen what the union had recommended, so say if the world was perfect, everyone was able to be vaccinated, we actually started moving on January 25th. Several of the things that we've heard so far is that we potentially have some issues in terms of number of teachers, and with what Marianne was sharing in terms of number of certified staff that we would need. I'm also aware that we would be looking at increased custodial, probably increased food services and all those kinds of things, transportation. And as you're saying, increased need for subs. Have we started looking into how if the world was perfect, which we know it's not, but if it was, have we started looking into how we would fill those holes? So like I'm thinking specifically, it was mentioned that we're going to need 7 more teachers. Are those new hires, or are we able to look at, shifting people if needed? Are we going to be able to hire back adequate classified staffing? That kind of thing. And are we starting to put those kind of things in motion?
Thanks, Sally. Yes, yes to all of that. No, we don't have enough staff. Yes, we're going to have to hire in terms of cert staff, even with all the shifting. And I have to say that Marianne and Kelly and Jenny and the principals have done a remarkable job. I looked at the plans. I was very, very impressed with what they've been able to do, because you have to remember that the request for assistance, that's the piece about the CDC and the governor, and do people qualify to work from home versus going into a classroom. And we have about 40 staff members currently who qualify. And I get requests on a daily basis, and we use that standard. But even with that, they've done the shifting. Now it is the new staff that we're going to have to bring on. We don't have enough paras, even after we get done laying off. That's not going to happen. We don't have enough subs. I met this morning with my staff. We're interviewing for subs. We're hoping to interview beginning of next week. We are advertising this next week for paras. We are, for every job classification that they're talking about, yes, absolutely, we're on it, because we know when we come back, whether it's January 25th or March 1st or whatever date it is, currently based on this model, we're not going to make it. We have to be proactive now in order to make sure that we can even come close. And even with that, Sally, I have to be honest, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. And I'm not trying to back away from it. I'll step up, but finding enough qualified people to walk in. And the other thing is just something I have to consider as from an HR perspective, and I don't like to go into this, but we have people who are in such a panic, they're going to go out on sick leave. That's not even figured in here. We have people who have sick leave and who feel so scared to come back right now that they may very well go out on a long-term sick leave. That's not even in a request for assistance. It's a totally different category. So the answer, I apologize, Sally, that's a long answer to a very direct question. Yes, we are being proactive in trying to get people on board, of course. Thank you.
So what about, I know currently we're using some of our specialists to help cover classes that maybe they wouldn't normally teach, math, English, some of our more core curriculum. Would that be something we'd be able to continue to help cover some of these holes?
Yes, and Marianne, I think Marianne has addressed that, and Kelly's addressed that, and yes, that's an option that we certainly have to be aware of and use. With any person that we can use to fill the holes, we're going to do it.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
You know, it occurs to me that since a lot of learning coaching has been, more of that has been assumed by the parents or the families, that we might find more volunteers that might be willing to come into the schools. If they've been doing it at home, they might be willing to help fill a role, help either as a volunteer or, you know, as a new para. You know, it might be a resource for hiring new positions as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Sandy, that I think very well could be, and frankly, you know, in a job market where, you know, a lot of people are hurting, and so when you put out jobs, I want to be very optimistic, because if we put out need for bus drivers, paras, volunteers, custodial services, I'm hoping that, and I believe we would get people who would apply. The cost and volunteers certainly help us. That's why I focused on the CERT piece, because we may be able to, and I think we could find people to work in the classified positions. The CERT piece gets a lot trickier, as you know. It gets much more difficult. But I appreciate, thank you. I know I don't mean to bring tough news, but it's real.
And we had more, and we kind of expected that would happen. The closer we came to an actual date, the more applications we might see for people that wanted, you know, that would need to work from home based on the CDC guidelines. And indeed, that is what we saw. We did see those numbers climb as we're getting closer. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other questions before we move on to career and technical education?
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Don.
Okay, well, thank you for letting me speak this evening, and welcome everybody and Happy New Year. I'm going to start with budget. Right now, we, as a program, CTE program is on budget. We're actually looking very good for budget. Right now, we were at 76 FTE over last year at 586, and I'm happy to say that January's count came back Monday, and we're at 602.68 in grades 9 through 12, so we're actually 92 over now, so that's good over last year. Middle level is still hanging in there at 86.02. So budget, we have no issue with budget in CTE right now. We should show a very positive carryover from last year when we get our numbers from OSPI this January. I'll move down to certificated staffing. We have 42 of them. We have a potential of 3, possibly 4 now that may not be able to come due to medical issues. We are working right now with Bruce and June on that. We want to make sure that the lab type classes are in person, so we may have to do some switching of teacher teaching classes, but we're very fortunate that last year we sent some teachers to some specialized training such as Project Lead the Way, anticipating that we were going to have them teach those classes in the future, and the future is here now. So it looks like we will probably be doing that. So we did a good thing being proactive on that. Classified staffing, I only have 2 classified staff. One is my secretary and one is Kim McElliott, who runs the student store and oversees it. They've both been working consistently full-time throughout this pandemic. Kim McElliott, I talked to her the other day. She has a plan to run the student store per COVID rules. The thing we would have to do there is we'll have to train all the students that work in there, and there's not going to be a vast, quite a few of them that are working in there. It's going to be a very small number, but it is a class that we run at SHS. We would like to continue running that. And one of the reasons is because that funds all of our CTSOs, which is our current technical student organizations. So we're working on that. Custodial support, nothing there for me. Food service, nothing there. When it gets down to transportation, I have nothing there. But then when you get to instructional program needs, we're going to continue to provide the kits for the students that stay at home and online. We will hopefully be able to use document cameras and GoPro cameras to stream classrooms for those kids that are online and provide them with kits. This week we had more kits going out. I was at SHS today, and I think yesterday they gave out 4 construction kits. We had about 30 more left to get out today. So they're doing really well on that as far as the distribution on that. One nice thing about the videoing is that next Wednesday on the 13th at 11 o'clock, we're going to take and do a dry run with all of our shop type classes to make sure that what we have planned is actually going to work before we have the kids coming in and splitting the kits between the online and the kids that are in person. So that is happening next Wednesday. And move down to activities. Our CTSOs, current tech student organizations, they will continue to meet via Zoom or in small groups as they have been. That is a mandate by OSPI because we receive federal funding, and the federal government has not moved away from that, so we still have to do it. As far as keeping the equity and participation there, we will be streaming those meetings via Zoom as we have been doing already. You get down to other cleaning, sanitizing, and equipment. Teachers will be taking care of that. The CTE teachers that I have talked to will be doing that. As far as equipment, tools, such as our tools, our welding, helmets, gloves, etc. We were very proactive in the last year on that, and we have purchased enough equipment in the form of welding helmets, gloves, coats that each student that takes the class will be able to utilize their own, and they'll have their own cubby to keep it in, so we won't have any cross-contamination. And we will hope that will cut down the spread of any type of virus. As far as what we've been doing district-wide, or as a district, I meet every Friday with WATCA, which is the Western Area CTE directors, and that is how we've been sharing our information as far as what each school district is doing and where we are, sharing best practices. I've also been fortunate enough to facilitate a once a month best practices meeting for all of our teachers, our CTE teachers, with regional CTE teachers. So we've had CTE teachers meeting with other districts via Zoom to be able to share best practices and find out what they're doing and how they're transitioning from online into in-person schools. So that's been a huge help right there also. So there's been a lot of communication going on. And for CTE, that is it. Do you have any questions? I stunned you all into silence.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate how proactive and how you're thinking ahead on a lot of this stuff. It's really well done.
I just had a question, just
Sure.
something that popped in my head. So the student store. So do you have an online store?
We don't have an online store. And that's a good question right there. But we usually only have about 3 students that actually work in the store at a time right now. So we'll have to look at that when it
But
comes.
you might have more sales.
That's true. That's true. They could pick it up, right? Pick up and delivery, just like the grocery stores are doing.
Right.
All right. Any other questions for Don?
And Alex, you're muted. You're still on mute, Alex.
All right, I'm not on mute now. First of all, Don, thank you. It was music to my ears, and I've known this before tonight that financially we're doing well with CTE, and we're keeping our head above water on all of our budgets. But it's nice to know that things are looking good with CTE and everything that we're trying to do with career-connected learning. I'm very happy about that. Nice job, and I don't have any further comments or questions.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think we can move on to K-12 Academies.
And that's Dina Alley.
Thank you, Dr. Possum. Thank you to the members of the board. Don covered a lot of what's happening at Shelton High School because the majority of those classes are CTE. But I want to bring up the whole K-12 Academy aspect, which also has a lot of very positive news in it. We've been able to continue many of our community partnerships. We have a multimedia communications class happening this term that is very popular with our community members. In fact, we have more requests for people to work with them than I think the instructor expected or maybe was ready for. So that's very exciting. We're continuing PEI and expanding it through Shelton High School. We've been having meetings, and we'll have some upcoming meetings about what PEI will look like, because again, that will be the K-12 thematic support for the Natural Resources Academy. We're continuing with guest speakers. We currently have a project going with the League of Women Voters, and the UW Climate Change Program is providing speakers to some of our natural resource classes. And our community partners who support our Bite of Reality for our freshman academy students, they actually have a virtual opportunity for that this year. And so I'm working with Susie Honecker-Wiersbicki and Curtis Patching, the administrator and counselor attached to Freshman Academy, to see how we can implement that in a virtual environment with greater support from their advisory teachers to make that opportunity still available for them. So I'm happy to report that this district is very supportive and continues to look at ways. Brian Wiersbicki is doing some junior achievement things virtually. So we're using that as an opportunity to look at various ways that we'll be able to expand that program. So we are still moving forward in our K-12 plan for academies. The new Shelton Academies Facebook page is up and running. If you haven't liked it yet, that's a plug for that so that we can get more information out. And I'm just appreciative of all the staff and principals. They're starting to plan for next year, and we're taking into account that we want to be a K-12 thematic system with supports at every grade level. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I guess my question would be, you're not seeing certificated staffing issues in?
I don't have any specific ones in addition to what Don has already talked about in CTE. And as he said, we're working closely with Shelton High School to look at the best possible placement for teachers based on whether or not they are working from home or whether or not they're working on campus. So, you know, one of the examples, just one possible example being in some of our science classes, if there are two teachers who can both teach the same thing, we would want the person who is on campus to be teaching the more lab heavy activity-based classes so that they're there with students, and perhaps the teacher who is teaching from home teaching a more introductory class that doesn't have as much hands-on. The other piece that we are looking at very heavily is the equity in academy activities, classes, and certifications between students who choose to stay fully remote, the family makes that choice, and students who return in whatever model we use returning. So for example, we use CPR and first aid in a number of our classes as one of the certifications that students can get. If a student chooses to remain fully remote, what does that mean for their access to certifications? And so we want to make sure, my job is to make sure that we're looking at every single class and saying, what does a student who stays fully remote have access to that's equitable to what a student who is in person in any model would be able to have access to.
Thank you.
So Dina, what you said there about science just got me thinking, and this may not specifically, in fact, it probably doesn't specifically relate to academies, but maybe Marianne, Kelly, this might relate to some of your stuff as well. Have we thought about in those situations, like your science example, where we have a staff member who's able to be on campus, and then maybe we have a science staff member who's needing to be at home? Have we thought about teaming those folks up? So we have the on-campus person is teaching all of the in-person science. And then when the kids and the students are at home, then we have the at-home science person who's working with our fully online kids, and then are also flipping back and forth between our A and B groups. So when A is there on Monday and Tuesday, then the at-home science person's working with group B so that they still have support, and then we flip it. Is that something that's a possibility? And Terry, you might actually be able to speak to this. I'm just thinking even K-12, is that something that might work?
Sally, we are, Bruce Kipper is working on some really creative solutions for that sort of thing. We're even looking at not even having to split things like that, because obviously we don't have double teachers for everything. So we really are looking at creative solutions. I feel really comfortable with the direction that the high school is going for that, so that kids aren't missing their lab time, that sort of thing.
Is that something that might even be a possibility, say elementary level, first grade teacher handles all of, is able to be on campus, is able to do, A group Monday, Tuesday, B group Thursday, Friday, and then we have an at-home teacher who's able then to maybe not be strictly, but is maybe working with a lot of first graders across the district, but is available. Is that something we've considered?
We totally considered it. We don't have the numbers right now unless we're going to hire more for something like that. But sure, it is on our radar. It just depends on how far we can push that budget and how many people we can actually find. It's hard to find people.
Sure.
So
no, I get
definitely.
That.
We don't want them to miss any sort of hands-on experience at all.
Right. All right. Thank you. Other questions for Dina? I know I took us on a bit of a tangent there.
Sally, if I could just go back to Sandy's question for just a moment. Sandy, I think one of the other things you were referring to in staffing is you do see extra hours requested from Mr. Kipper at Shelton High School. And part of that is if students are on campus, but their teacher is at home, who is in the classroom with the students? And so, as Kelly said, there's lots of really creative things happening for the teacher to be able to be there virtually, but you still need supervision there physically. And so that's part of those staffing hours that you see at Shelton High School.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dina. Good job.
All right, so I think we're ready to move on to assessment.
Bob?
All right, good evening. So in assessment, most of the issues that will come up with reopening break down into three basic ideas. And one is around scheduling, one is around resources, and then coordinating with our tech department to make sure everything runs the way we need it to. So we don't have huge budget needs. My concern there is about, are we going to have enough Chromebooks if students still have their Chromebooks at home? And so I've got the buildings counting what they have available. I've worked with Brenda and Glenn, and I think we're going to be able to be okay with that, but that's a concern at this point. Scheduling for testing. At this point, we're being directed to assume that testing is going to go on as it has in a normal year. And so that, of course, could change, but we have the buildings putting together schedules so that we're prepared for whether we're back in a hybrid model, whether we're back with all students in the building. There may be some direction coming from the state if we have to do some sort of remote assessment. We don't know where that's going to land yet. So as we get more information, we'll continue to keep on top of that. Not a whole lot of staffing issues or custodial support other than perhaps some cleaning in areas that maybe typically wouldn't have been used for testing. Not much as far as food service or transportation. And our biggest new information that we've gotten is that they've changed the window for the ELPA 21 testing, the EL proficiency assessment. So it used to always be done before we started Smarter Balance, so there was no pressure on Chromebooks and that sort of thing since they're used for both of those. They've moved that window so that they now overlap. And so again, that's more of just kind of a scheduling logistics issue, but we're working on it. And as we get more information, we'll continue to update our plan at the building and district levels. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
So Bob, do we have any idea about whether is the state still working on potentially getting a waiver for this year for testing?
So the waiver has been turned in to the federal government. My understanding, and I haven't heard an update on this since before Christmas break, but they had not gotten a response back yet at that point. And with the change in administration, I'm not sure what the timeline might be for when we would hear on that. The legislature is being encouraged by both the state board and by OSPI to provide graduation waivers similar to what happened last year. But that's, the legislature will decide that. And they're hoping to get an early answer from them on that, but that also is still to be determined.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Yep.
All right, so moving on to communications.
Katie?
Good evening. Yes, I'm here. Good evening. So I am here to present our communications plan as we move forward to the reopening of our schools. All of the categories are summarized here because everything has to do with communications. So in order to be successful, we need our families and staff and our stakeholders to be aware of what is going on. So in order to do that, I will continue to collaborate with our reopening of schools subcommittee leaders, as well as our department heads, the superintendent, our school board, and the Mason County Health Department to make sure all of our families and staff and stakeholders are aware of all the changes and updates as we continue through this school year. But we've listed I've listed all of our communication channels down below. You can see those there. And we'll continue to use all of those different methods to try and reach as many people as possible in order for everyone to be aware of what is going on in the school district. And that is what I have. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Thank you, Katie.
So moving on, athletics and activities.
Trevor. Welcome.
Welcome. I sent out an email to a lot of you earlier today, and it's the WIAA today approved an amendment to change the schedule again, and starting February 1st, we will be starting fall sports, which will be including cross-country, football, girls swimming, and girls soccer and volleyball. We are in the process right now of getting schedules put together. We have meetings tomorrow, so I'll get more information out to everybody. But as far as budget, there is a little bit of an issue because we get our funding from ASB cards and gate money. And with the new governor's proposal, for an example, football, we would only be able to have 200 spectators, which includes players, coaches, officials, and everything else at our games. So that will hinder our gate money. And also with House Bill 1660, that reduces our ASB funds because now free and reduced students no longer have to pay ASB fees to play sports. We'll look into that. We'll be getting some money in, and so hopefully we'll be able to purchase some of our equipment that we need for the year. As far as staffing, all the coaches are excited. They're ready to get back, ready to coach the kids. I have a few assistant coach positions to fill, but we'll do that very quickly here. As far as custodial staff, I will make sure that we speak with with Mike and the custodial staff here at the high school and coordinate practices and games and make sure that we have a cleaning schedule put together. We have nothing for food service. Transportation, obviously we're going to have bus drivers to transport our kids to away games, so that'll be getting schedules put together and communicating with Holly and transportation to make sure that we can get our kids to games. We don't have anything for instructional programs, and the only issue that I would like to address is making sure that we get kids proper face masks for the season. We might have to purchase some gaiters because some of the sports are required still to wear face masks during competitions. Is there any questions for athletics?
Gaiters, can you explain what that is?
They're the neck gaiters that you wear around your neck and you can pull up. So if you're playing in a football game and you're playing, it can be around your neck, and as soon as you come off the field and take your helmet off, you can pull the gaiters up around your face.
Okay, thank you.
Trevor, going back to your example of a limit of 200 people for football.
Yep.
I assume that is times both teams.
Yes, so that would be both teams, officials, coaches. So after you add all that up, it's about 150 people. So, and then when we start for volleyball, we have to be in phase 2 to actually have volleyball, which I believe we should be in by February 1st. We are allowed to have 25% capacity in the mini dome.
Oh, okay. And so they have some sort of limitations like that for every sport, or?
Yes, for low and moderate risk sports, we can play inside in phase 2, but for high risk sports like wrestling and basketball, we cannot. That's why they chose to flip the seasons around so we could get the most sports in this year as possible.
All righty, thank you.
Yep.
Very good, thank you very much.
All right, so facilities.
Good evening, everyone. I think we started this meeting by saying good afternoon, and now we're into evening. So first, I'll start you into the budget section. It is a significant spend that the facilities and safety will be spending in order to implement the hybrid model. And Brenda will go into some of those costs, but with some specificity. But that includes all of our custodians returning back to normal status because we had 8 laid off custodians that will be returning back to full force. We also will be needing temp custodians to also assist for the extra cleaning, helping with hand washing stations, keeping, because of the amount of hand washing that's done throughout the building, constantly keeping paper towels in stock, the additional garbage runs that are going to be necessary. Also helping with the increased amount of food service, because we're going to be running more lunches in order to, because once we socially separate everyone into the distance that we need to, then we do not have the capacity in our cafeterias and gyms to be able to see everybody at once. So we have more lunches, more turnover and cleaning and sanitizing between groups. And so there's a significant amount of additional custodial work than we would have in a traditional model. And so we also have, we're spending money on plexiglass separators, the hand washing stations, a very significant amount of money on PPE, as you can imagine. And we also have wayfinding signage and good practices signage for hand washing, reminding people at all of our entrances that they need to wear masks. And the wayfinding signage, of course, is to help people to find their way to screening locations and so forth, as well as we've spent money on screening kiosks. Then for certified and classified staffing, there's no impacts for this department. The custodial support is broken out by school, exactly how many hours and when custodians would be brought back based on the model of when we were going to be looking to reopen schools. There'll be some modifications that need to be done to this document based on the plan that Kelly outlined earlier. I had a slightly different one when I put this together, but it would not modify the cost very much. Another thing that would be out of this document here is that overtime for custodial staff will be needed to support athletics. So one of the things that was not originally part of our plan was we wouldn't know where athletics was going to be, and now that we know where that's at, all of the custodial services that are going on during the building would not be able to support going back and recleaning locker rooms and things of that nature. So that would be achieved through overtime only on an event basis as needed. And then food service, we're going to be working with, physically laying out all of our cafeterias. That process has started now, as well as setting up for queue lines where kids are socially distanced while they're, waiting to pick up food and for hand washing before meals. And as well, we assist transportation with PPE needs. We don't have anything specifically related to the instructional program needs in our department. And we have reference here to Y-Care, and we're working with Mary Ann and the YMCA to try to find them another home than currently at Bordeaux for the purposes of allowing that program to continue during the hybrid model. I also have a separate section that's different from the other departments where we put together just some protocols explaining, information about the high, moderate, and low levels, which determine when certain activities and things that can take place. Like one of the notes here is about that rates have to be establishing below 200 in order for us to have high school students back. So even though we're allowed to bring back groups now in small groups and we're bringing back gradated returns of lower grades, in order to be able to do the high school ages, we do need to be below that 200 level. And so that was a trend we were working towards, and now there's been a slight uptick. We don't know if it's a continuing trend here in Mason County, but it's something that we're watching and we will keep reporting to everyone as the numbers are out there every day. Additionally, we have information here regarding the State Department of Health, which is one of the things that to talk about how getting information out there in advance to families, reminding them of the process of how screening is going to go. So as we get closer, a week, 10 days out from start, we're going to be, getting a mass information out there, videos, things on social media, explaining the screening process and reminding parents not to send kids to school sick with any symptoms. Otherwise, they're going to be sent right back home. And So we want to just minimize that process and allow our screening processes to go faster, which is really important that we have as quick a screening system as possible, so we can have students not waiting for screening, after the bell rings, and we can get learning happening, which is the key point of having a hybrid model, is having them in their classrooms. So there are things that parents can do to help us that. We're gonna get that information out there. We're also trying to keep every cohort separated as much as possible for help preventing of disease. Points about social distancing, hand hygiene, things we're going to be reducing, like signage and getting that information out to everyone. And also that information was listed there that talked about PPE and cleaning routines between groups, and also the district roles that the state requires. They wanted that information, and so that was listed out who the district COVID coordinator is, and that's myself. And also on the building level, the screening level, and those who handle isolation. Another thing that's come up is testing. At the point that this document is created, the school district would not perform any actual COVID testing itself. It would always be sending someone to a healthcare provider when testing was needed. But one of the things that is the Mason County PIO has reached out to us after this document was created, saying that they have some rapid testing kits that are for 15-minute type tests that they're going to be giving to the district at some point that could be useful. We'll get those to the nurses, and if we are in a position we have to do a rapid test, we would have to do that. But of course, we'd have to have well in advance send out to parents documents that would approve us to be able to do that. And so we can't just randomly or test anyone without any student without authorizations. Then also we have in here the protocols for when someone tests positive for COVID, whether it's a staff member or a student, the investigation process, and how outbreaks, how they're defined. When there's an outbreak, when there's 2 or more students or 2 or more people that transfer within the building a case of COVID, then it becomes an outbreak. And then an outbreak kicks off a higher level of investigation from the county health services, and we would need to work with them and participate on those investigations. And also it talks about how we handle students that become ill after the screening process, and they pass the screening process, but something happens during the day, how we're going to isolate those students and how we're going to get them back to their parents. Or sometimes we may have an instance where we may just get notified where a student may become positive during the day. Like for instance, they took a test, but they did not report to anyone that they have been tested for COVID, and then find out they get a result positive during the day. We have a process to handle that as well. And with that, I stand for questions.
Robert, can you go back to the part of that where you talk about the different phases and the case thresholds? And I was just curious.
There you go.
Yeah. And that's specific protocols for schools, right?
That is correct.
From Department of Health?
That is correct. Okay. And it started with the governor's guidance from his press conference, I believe it was December 11th, and then DOH followed with presenting those guidelines.
Thank you.
Another thing that's probably worth mentioning, since I've got the microphone, is vaccinations. And today, or actually yesterday, the Department of Health broke apart phase 1B and moved some sections around. Originally, school staff was in what would be phase 2, and now they've broken out staff that are 50 and older into what's called phase 1B tier 2, and staff that are under 50 into phase 1B tier 4. And their current projection, and currently they're planning to move the whole state through these different phases. They're not going to be by county. And that when that occurs is when we get to section 1B, they're projecting if everything goes to plan, it would happen sometime in February, where 50 and older staff members would be eligible to take the vaccine if they don't qualify through some other group or qualifications. And that tier 4 would happen in April if everything goes to plan. And so there's a lot of the Department of Health is just very skittish about giving timelines and dates because there's a lot of variables, but currently that's what they're looking at in their projections.
Okay, and that plays into the SEA's letter and position about timing of vaccinations and whatnot. So I understand that a little bit better. Can we do anything about outside dining, outside food services? You know, like expanding that. Is there any way that we can implement something like that in the district?
So one of the things that, whether it's inside or outside dining, physical distancing is still required. And so for us, it's just, there's no benefit to going outside. We want to keep people indoors as much as possible, of course, this time of year and with little kids. So we've been focusing everything related to dining indoors. Now, when the weather improves, our students and staff love to eat outdoors. We have plazas and things all over the place, and we would certainly look at how we can achieve that in good weather but still having to maintain physical distancing when we do so.
One last question. The company that is helping us with the kiosks for the screening in the buildings, anybody coming up with a more mobile unit that could maybe be on a bus and maybe capture, if nothing else, just a temperature before a student steps on the bus?
One of the big issues that these machines have, and with everyone that we solicited proposals from, is they are not capable of movement. They are very sensitive to ambient temperature changes and things that are going on. So in a case like a school bus, with the doors opening, closing, and the temperatures are constantly in fluctuation, this type of system would not work. Not to say that technology won't change or someone with a different system, better system may become available, but I know that's one of the issues we have now. For instance, these machines that we have now, we have to, when we put them in place to start the day, they need to be on for at least an hour before they start screening. So the unit boots up, it gets to the ambient temperature of the room, and things are relatively steady. And we have to be careful about where we place the kiosk. They can't be right near a door. They can't be in direct sunlight, things of that nature.
Wow.
I had a question about lunches. So when we were going through the other sections, it looked like the plan was to utilize the lunch rooms so children would be going into them. And so I was just wondering about that because I have been in touch with schools that have been going back in Lewis County, in Grace Harbor County, Clallam, and for the most part, they've been making lunches and taking them to the classrooms. Those children are not moving that much. The other question I had when you're talking about facilities and food service and talking about physical separation, then do we have a requirement, an obligation for our adult spaces as well? If we have our teachers back and they have a staff room to go to, we've been talking a lot about students. What other issues or requirements that we have to protect our adults as well?
It's a great question. For instance, in our staff lounges, we'll have maximum COVID capacity signage that says the maximum that people can be in there and be physically distanced. It is still just like it's an L&I requirement. So we have to follow all the L&I standards for staff, which sometimes are different and conflicting with what we get for OSPI for students. So it is, but it is something that we've completely managed, and we work with the principals, and I'm on principal meetings all the time, and we're talking about information that we pass on to staff, reminders about the separation, and we use signage where it's helpful as well to remind staff to keep separated.
Other questions for Robert? All right, thank you, Robert. You've had a huge job getting this all put together and figured out, so thank you for that. So moving on to budget, food service, transportation, technology.
That's Brenda.
Good evening. Everything you've heard tonight drops right back to here. I just want to say right up front, the implementation of a hybrid model is very costly, and it changes constantly. I have even heard a couple things tonight that are new that are going to cost us more money that I don't have in my report. So I just want you to be aware of that. Of course, there's additional staffing costs, and I'll go through more of them down through here, but you've got all the student supervision, like you heard Marianne and Kelly say, we don't have those paras there to supervise those kids right now. So when we bring them back in, we're going to need to bring back the paras to supervise. Robert went through all of his PPE, the screening kiosks, the hand washing stations, signage, all of that. So far this year, we have spent $300,000 on the kiosks, the hand washing stations, all of the PPE. That was never budgeted for. So there's an impact right off the top. That's a requirement that we've had to do. So I am constantly right now reviewing our budget, trying to reallocate to make this plan move forward for us. It's going to be very difficult. We're probably going to dip into the fund balance. I'm going to be just really honest with you with the costs we're seeing here. So that's the budget piece, and I'll detail more down as we go down. Robert, if you'll just move down a little for me. Certified staffing, when I put this together at that point in time, we only knew about 2 additional CERT teachers that we were going to need at OMS. I heard Marianne say there's 5 more now. So that cost just rose to $735,000 instead of $210,000 just for that category for those CERT teachers. And that could continue to change. As Terry said, we're continually getting requests to be not working due to the certification to stay at home. So that's a moving target as we move forward with this. Classified staffing, again, I talked about the paras needed for the supervision. We need them for the screening at the kiosks. We're also going to need them for lunchroom supervision, and I will explain that a little bit as I get down into food services. So we'll be reinstating the laid off paras and possibly having to hire additional into that. Right now, on the estimated number of hours that you saw in Marianne's report, they're requesting a little over 271 hours of basic ed para time. Right now, that's almost $1 million through the end of the school year, starting on January 25th. That is not in the budget. That was one of our budget reductions when we passed the budget in the fall. We're also going to need custodians to meet all the cleaning protocols. So Robert will be bringing back all his laid off custodians. You also saw that he's going to need additional custodial staff. Right now, we're projecting that to be almost $150,000. I think I need to be back up, Robert. Thank you. That's not budgeted either. So that's on top of everything. Bus drivers, we're going to probably need to call all of them back. Holly has the pre-K1 routes pretty much ready to go. She's had to add 13 additional routes, and we only have 14 remaining laid off bus drivers. So that's pretty much going to bring everybody back. We are discontinuing the 2 food service routes that we've been doing because we're not delivering that many meals any longer on those. I think we had 15 today on one of the buses. So we need those 2 drivers and those 2 buses to bring the kids back. So we'll be just continuing those routes, and those parents can still come to our 3 food sites to pick up the meals. So I had on here, this is another changing target, that we were waiting for the state to approve the driver training plan. The state finally approved it yesterday for Holly. So she's been working with Robert to see how to bring back all 3 of our driver trainers to be able to train some drivers. So hopefully we can get some drivers trained. That process does take 4 to 6 weeks. So we wouldn't have drivers for probably 2 months, even if we start the training. The food service workers will increase as we start bringing grades back. So we'll be reinstating everyone that was laid off. So eventually we'll have all of them back. In phase 2, we're going to have to condense down our 3 sites where the parents are able to come right now and pick up meals at Bordeaux, Evergreen, and the high school. We won't be able to keep those going with the staffing because we'll need them to serve the food at the schools. We are hoping to keep the high school one open in phase 2, and then we'll shut that one down as we move into phase 3. Again, custodial support, Robert is going to need more. He's got to keep those hand washing stations cleaned. He's also going to be doing continuous table cleaning through the food service periods. And there's going to be additional garbage during those food service periods because everything is grab and go, extra wrappers, extra garbage, paper bags. So we will need additional custodial support above our normal. Food service, we feel pretty good about this portion. I think this is the only one I do feel pretty comfortable with at the moment, but we've been doing this since March, so we've kind of got it figured out at this point. So our meal times are going to overlap with what our pickup times are for the families and our in-person. So we're trying to figure that out and coordinate that. At this point in time, we think for the phase 1, bringing pre-K 1 back, we'll only need to add 1 additional person at Evergreen to cover both the pickup site and the in-person. We're constantly monitoring the funding versus expenditures. I went through it today, and right now we're $50,000 in the red for this year so far. Normally we run that program in the black, but we're just not serving the meals. And I mean, we maybe have 1/3 of our staff and we're still 50,000 in the red. So as I stated, your breakfast will be grab and go. We're going to have food service people at the screening kiosks. They're going to hand those to the students as they arrive. They'll take those to their classrooms to eat the breakfast. Lunch will be a grab and go with distance seating in the lunchrooms. Robert's staff has been great. They've been figuring out how many we can have in there at a time and fixing the tables so they'll be spaced apart for social distancing. We are going to need para support in those lunchrooms because those little boys and girls struggle with opening those prepackaged foods. They're going to need help opening their food. And then we're also going to need the additional help from custodial to keep those tables clean in between students sitting at them. And Robert's staff will have those tables ready to go by January 25th. And we're going to, right now we're having a little difficulty knowing how many students will be eating the school lunches or bringing their own. So that'll be one of our first key points that we'll be monitoring. So we're ordering food accurately and not wasting food or running out. Moving on to transportation. This is where we have a bit of a challenge. Been talking and working with Holly daily, several times a day actually. And I have her on here in case you have questions that I can't answer. So our biggest thing is having enough buses and drivers to support the hybrid model. She just updated me today that the co-op, as you know, that we run is 10 drivers short to run the co-op, and we only have 7 subs. So we're starting off short. We now will be able to train some drivers, but like I said, that's a 4 to 6 week process, and we have to have people apply. Our bus drivers are concerned about transporting more than 20 students on a big bus. The students will be 1 per seat, and those are 84 passenger buses. Right now, the most we have on the pre-K 1 routes is 17 on a bus. So we're still okay there. The drivers are going to need extra time at the school to clean their buses between routes. Marianne mentioned the transfer buses. We have bought foggers and we're working with Robert to get those placed at the school. So the drivers will be able to hop off between routes, grab their foggers and get back on and clean their buses so they can take the next route. We're hoping to drop off the students at the schools earlier than normal so they can be screened through there. And then if you go down a little bit, Robert, thank you. Thanks. And we cannot screen students before they get on the bus at a bus stop. Sandy had a great question about the screeners. Once those students are at the bus stop, we're not allowed to tell them they can't get on the bus. So even if we saw they had a temperature, we would have to allow them to get on the bus and transport them. It's in the state law. So that's transportation. Technology, Glenn and his group have been working for the past 2 weeks. We got a new order of Chromebooks in finally. They were on back order for quite some time. We received 300 this last week. We're also taking what is left in the schools and redistributing them into the Chrome carts. We've been working with the elementary principals to find out what their class sizes are anticipated to be. So we have them distributed so they'll have Chromebooks in their schools on the 25th. We will be ordering more Chromebooks this year, but I just had an email from Aaron Miller yesterday that they're on back order for like 4 to 5 months right now. So we're going to try and get an order in right away for that. Activities and athletics. The biggest issue for us there on my side is transportation, because we'll need to send several buses as long as that social distancing requirement is in effect. It won't just take one bus to take a team. It's going to take several. So that's taking drivers and buses. We also, as you heard Trevor say, ASB is not generating revenue. So general fund may end up needing to help this year with athletics and activities because I think I ran a report and they had $1,000 in revenue in November. That was all they had come in. So that's very unusual for ASB. So we'll be monitoring that closely. We do have an agreement with SAAA. It's just a memorandum of understanding on different types of stipends for conditioning, partial seasons, and running virtual clubs. And then Trevor just told us that WIA is going to have sports. So that's going to change that a little bit, but we're good to go. But I just want it to be clear that this is a very expensive model to go into, and it will have a huge budget impact for us. So I would like to also share a little bit outside of this report, if that's okay, Alex. We did get notice this afternoon that there is a second round of Esser funds coming, but they can't tell us when it will come because the legislators have to take action on it. They don't know if they'll take action at the beginning of the session or at the end of the session, and it's a long session. So there is some possible money, but we don't know when. So, and on
or how much.
And how much, right? And one more thing I did forget to mention, the transportation funding is another one that is still up in the air. We, at this point in time, will only receive through January unless the legislature takes action. So if we bring all those bus drivers back, that's coming out of the fund balance because we won't be receiving money at this point unless something changes.
Thank you, Brenda.
So that's all I have.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Questions for Brenda?
I have one for Brenda about the ASB account. There seems that has been, there's quite a bit of money in that one from time to time. Is any of that reserved, or we would anticipate that would be seriously or completely depleted and we would still dip into the general fund?
So the ASB budget is broken into all of the clubs and athletic clubs, and they have raised their own revenue. So it would take a matter of the ASB taking action to reallocate all that and pretty much take it away from the clubs.
So currently each club has their own balance. reserved for that club or that activity. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Have we had input from ASB on, our student government or anything on how to do activities and athletics?
I haven't because each school runs their own ASBs. I just monitor it at the 10,000 foot level. So Trevor may be able to answer that. I'm not positive. But.
Trevor, can you respond to that?
Yeah, so most of the money that's in the accounts, and it's online, you look it up on our high school page, is clubs that have raised money in the past. So for instance, baseball might have $1,000, boys basketball might have $500 in their account, and it all adds up to the money that's in there now. I know currently athletics has negative $31, because we haven't had any revenue this year at all. And we still had to pay our WIAA fee. We had to pay our conference fee. There's a lot of fees that we had to pay. So that's the issue right now is we haven't had any ASB come in for our athletics because we haven't had the kids pay for it yet because we didn't want to have to reimburse them. And then we have had no gate money at all. So I know when we do start sports, we will get some money in, and then I can use some of that money for baseballs, for game balls, for volleyball game balls. But for like the uniform rotation, we won't have any money for uniforms. For other fees that we have, like our subscriptions and stuff, we won't have money for that. So it would be really hard for us to take money away from a club after they've done fundraising over the years to try to use that money for something that they want. Now, an example, cross country, John Johnson came in the other day and he wanted some shorts. I told him athletics didn't have any money, but the cross country account had $391 in their account. So he was going to use that money to buy shorts for the team. So that's kind of an example. So all the teams have their own revenue that they've generated over the years, and athletics is solely based on gate money, and we get partial ASB funds. And then I don't know currently how much just the ASB general fund has, but I don't think they have that much either.
Mm-hmm. No.
Other questions? Lynn, did you have a question?
I did. I don't know if it's kind of a broader question, I guess, because with all of the challenges and the financial impacts of this hybrid model, and I don't know what staff is recommending or how other board members feel, but I'm just questioning, even if we delayed it until like after vaccinations or whatever, ultimately unless something happens with the virus, I think we're going to end up in a hybrid model no matter what, right? I mean, even if it's later in the year, is the idea that it's just going to be less of a financial impact, but all of these other issues are still going to exist is I guess that's kind of a more philosophical question.
I can, if I could, please, I could respond. Lynn, is that okay, Sally? I think you're absolutely right. There are so many unknowns, Lynn, that it's so difficult to plan. I think the cabinet has done an excellent job putting together a comprehensive plan to reopen our schools. But as you're mentioning, we're probably going to be dealing with some of the same issues regardless when school will begin. It's very complex. But I can tell you that we've really thought through every aspect of our program, especially as it relates to the staffing issue that Terry discussed and the issue of vaccinating our staff. Those are critical pieces to restarting our school. The last thing that we want to do is start school and not offer the very best in-person and online program, and having appropriate staffing to make that happen. That's where you're going 5 steps forward and 10 steps back. And we don't want to do that. And I can tell you, I've talked to a number of superintendents in and around this area and beyond. And what appears to be working extremely well in these districts is not necessarily so. They have the same issues that we have. And but every school district is a little different. And I'm very happy to report that you as a board and I as a superintendent, from March until now, have kept the safety and the health of our staff and our students a priority one. And there is no question in anybody's mind in this community that that is the case. Again, I thank the board for your time this afternoon. I thank the cabinet for doing a very comprehensive job. They worked during the holidays to be prepared for this meeting. We all did. And, we want to offer the very best educational program possible, regardless of when we start school again. We're prepared right now, through thick and thin, to start school on January 25th. But you've read the same document that I've read from our teachers union, and they're very concerned. And that impacts everything that we've talked about this afternoon. And it goes right back to some of the concerns, the specific concerns that Terry mentioned. We've talked about all this, of course, with cabinet many times over. And the bottom line is, we want the very best for our kids and our families. And we want people to be safe. And we want to monitor very closely COVID and where it's going. We don't want to put anybody in harm's way as it relates to COVID, because we're talking about life and death. And so it's a difficult place for us to be. But if we keep our standards high in terms of the educational program and the safety and the health of our people, we're going to win. There's no question. We're going to win. Our kids are going to win. Our community is going to win. So I'm very concerned, as the rest of cabinet is, in terms of the staffing issue and in terms of the health and safety of our people.
Alex, I have a real quick point. Can I piggyback on about the physical distancing aspect?
Yeah.
I just wanted to Lynn's question and point is that what drives us to the hybrid model is the physical distancing. Everything, if that requirement did not exist, or if the governor changed it in any way, or OSPI for that matter, at some point in the future, then the hybrid model could be thrown out. We could go to a traditional model. And so it is plausible that as we get down to the end of the virus and this pandemic, and as vaccines start to really help the system, it's possible that they could keep us, at least for schools. There's been a tendency sometimes to treat schools differently than the general public. That at least for school's sake, especially if the hybrid model is not working statewide and it's creating more problems too, that they may allow us to get away from the physical distancing aspect and just full PPE and keeping all students in PPE. And that, I guess that's kind of my hope, knowing that there's a lot of problems with the hybrid system too, that maybe we can get to also as soon as possible, getting away from the physical distancing requirements at some point in schools.
To follow up on that, Robert, is there any kind of research? I mean, I know there's research being done on schools and the virus, the impact on communities, but do you know of anything that's kind of being talked about in the industry it looks like it's trending a certain way?
No, I think the big thing is that since it's so fragmented how COVID impacts different groups, different communities, different races and equity issues, and it's just very fragmented. And I think so long established trends, we almost recognize them after they're meaningless. And so I don't have a lot of hope necessarily in that.
Did all receive that report from the governor's office and from OSPI on the current data regarding schools. And that was even showing low transmission rates within schools in communities that had high cases. And of course, all of that data that they have, that they continue to gather, has been with schools where no one has been vaccinated. What they do have is physical distancing, masking, and hygiene. And that was showing very low rates of transmission within the school. So the schools were a safer place to be than the community. That is data that's out there that we've all been given and continues to build, whether that's in the United States or worldwide.
And now we're getting the variants that tend to be attacking younger people.
I have a question for Robert. We upgraded our air filtration, I believe it was, from a MERV 13 rating to a MERV 15.
So thank you for pointing that out. I do have a change in that. We have very few places that we can actually use a MERV 15. Most instances, we upgraded from a MERV 8 to a MERV 13. And so we have probably 80% of the district has MERV 13s. And in some places we still have a MERV 8. But one of the things that is we're finding out more data and information is that spread doesn't seem to be happening through our systems. In fact, now we're down to the 15-minute rule, right? That it seems like most preponderance of cases, people are spending 15 minutes or more to get transmission. Unless they're in a high risk scenario and dealing with fluids and things of that nature. So we did a study, just to recap it quickly. We did a study, we hired a third party that came in, evaluated our systems, gave us ratios that we could change fresh air dampers. So we have a lot more fresh air in our buildings than we usually do. And then we have the increased filtration. Whatever the recommendation of the maximum filtration that the system could handle, from this third party is what we implemented in all of our locations.
And is there any talk out there about changing the 6-foot distancing rule based on what a building's MERV is?
No, and if that, I don't know if that would be a good connection, since we really, in my all my conversations with Department of Health, locally, state level, that's just not a big concern for them, is transmission through mechanical systems, especially when we have newer buildings that have, high volumes of fresh air and the increased filter types. So I don't know if anybody would be moved very much by that to allow us to relax any of our other requirements.
Thank you.
Sally B, I saw that you had a question.
Oh, I put it in the chat box. I was just wondering with, as Trevor was talking about the activities and clubs, if through some of those channels, if we had gotten any input from students on suggestions, ideas. Sometimes those that are in it have things that us adults aren't looking at. So I'm just wondering if we're taking advantage of that and getting that input.
Trevor just rejoined the meeting, so I'm not sure exactly how much of that he just heard.
Sorry, I got booted out. What did I miss?
Trevor, I was just asking if students that are involved in sports and activities, if they had been reached out to ask about their ideas, their suggestions, just getting their input and their insights. Oftentimes they have different views than us adults. And, I've been talking to people at all different levels and some students, but just wondering about any input we might be getting from that direction.
As far as, when we were here before the holiday break, when we had practices going on, I was going around to a lot of the practices and talking to a lot of the students, and they were just super excited to be on campus. They were excited to be playing sports. They couldn't wait for the seasons. So We have not announced to anybody yet about the seasons because we want to make sure we finalize it tomorrow in our meetings. And then we will be sending out information to students, to parents, and to make sure they're signed up and everything. And the coaches also will be communicating with the kids to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. So this is kind of a curveball that was thrown at us today because we were expecting to start basketball and wrestling and everything else on February 1st. And then all of a sudden last night at 9 o'clock, I get a text saying that they switched it to fall sports and then it was approved today. So we'll get the information out. You know, kids are pretty resilient and they just want to get back on campus and they want to participate in sports. So
well, I understand they're anxious to get back to their sports and everything. One of the things I'm wanting to find out, because I know, I mean, we're all social beings and we want to be together. But is there a difference? Is there a hesitancy? Number one, I can understand the excitement about being in the sports that they love and are passionate about. In turn, is there a discussion about being on campus going to classes?
I have not had that discussion with the students, but I would be willing to have that conversation, yes.
Great, thank you.
Mary Ann, can you help out on that question? Are students excited to get back to school for academic purposes?
Our students are super excited to get back to school for academic services. Absolutely, of course. They miss their friends. They miss that socializing piece, which is just absolutely important. But I also have to say, we have some kids that have found that this online learning really works for them. And so we're trying to be innovative and creative moving forward, even after COVID. How can we keep sort of an online model going so we can reach that group of students as well? But yeah, they're super excited. I know that as soon as they hear we're back to school, I know they're going to be jumping up and down. So.
And I do know I've made a couple guest appearances in some classes, and some of those kids totally hate being online. I will say that. And they have expressed that to me, and they just want to get back in the classroom. So,
as the district safety officer, I would be remiss if I just didn't remind everyone that it will not be like conventional school when they return. We're required to keep them physically distanced, and there'll be a level of frustration that happens with that. I'm sure they'll be happy to see that their friends are near, and there'll be some great, opportunities for that. But it will not be anything like a conventional school. Teachers will be put in a position that they're constantly reminding students to stay physically apart from each other. They can't sit together at lunch in a conventional sense and talk like they used to. It'll be I'm sure it's superior in many ways to the online model, and I don't want it to sound like I'm negative, but just want to remind the safety aspects of what the state and OSP are going to require of us to keep students separate.
I have heard that. I have a cousin that teaches first grade in Elma, and they're in a hybrid. And yeah, there's the excitement, but when it's in reality and you have to have these barriers, the children are, they had difficulty with that. What do you mean I can only be with these kids or that? And what do you, yeah. So there was confusion, and they had to be very strict and, and set those boundaries. And, that was for first graders who aren't as independent or have those mindsets as older students might have, that they are dealing with those things.
So any final questions or thoughts from board members?
Just want to thank everybody for the time and efforts and dedication in pulling all the data together, and appreciate their time.
Sally, if I could, I do have my form that I would like to screen.
Oh. Yes, of course. Sorry, I did not mean to.
That's all right.
Skip you.
Okay. Robert, can you put
Just
that?
1 second. I have a hovering mouse issue that does not want me to select. It's like the Let's see, and if people would stop texting me, that would help too. All right. There you go, sir.
Thank you. Well, it goes without saying, my responsibility as your superintendent is, number one, to put a plan together. And I've been very fortunate to work with very talented people that work diligently to put the comprehensive plan that they've exemplified this afternoon. My responsibility is to work hand in hand with our people, with our cabinet, with our principals, with our teachers, with our unions, to ensure the safe and healthy opening of our schools, and to make sure that the academic program is second to none. It's a huge challenge, but I believe we have the people to make it happen. I think tonight we've presented a very comprehensive plan, and we can open schools at any time, January 25th or otherwise. The only other consideration is where our unions are coming from, and that is the safety of our staff and the fact that they want the opportunity to be vaccinated before coming to work. That's the reality of our situation at this time. But in terms of starting school, I feel confident. I feel very confident in our teachers, in our classified staff, in our cabinet and principals, assistant principals, counselors, you name it. We can do whatever we need to do to make sure that our kids have the very best. There's no question in my mind. It's just making the decision based on what you've heard this evening, this afternoon, I should say, which direction we want to go, taking into account all the different factors that have been mentioned.
All right, questions for Alex?
I have one question, Alex. So, you know, if we remain in an online schooling situation, has there been discussion about starting later for high school age or middle school age kids? I've heard some feedback from some parents that other school districts are doing this and it's being successful there. I didn't know whether we'd had any of those type of discussions.
In doing what now?
Starting later for high school students or I think it's like middle school to high school students. There's a lot of research saying that, you know, their biological clock is different, and so the early start times is hard for them. And so it seems like with an online model, it would be much easier to adjust that for them than, you know, really dealing with busing and all of those types of things. But I didn't know whether that had been part of any of the reopening discussions or.
It has been, and you know, the governor indicated, and help me here, Robert, that in terms of the high school program, where it would have to be before we went in person, I think it was 200 or less. Is that correct?
200, that's correct, per 100,000 in Mason County. And it has to be a sustaining trend too, not just pop down for one day.
But in terms of what you're talking about, Lynn, in regards to continuing a quality online program for our high school kids, absolutely, that's been discussed. And from all indications, and Marianne, you help me here, but from all indications I'm getting, not from every single staff member, because I know there's staff that maybe don't think that the online program is what it needs to be, but there are a lot of teachers that feel that it's working. People have worked hard to make it work well. But it's moving forward. It's getting better and better each and every day. And to implement an online program for our upper level grades, I think is the way to go at this point in time.
All right, other thoughts or questions?
Your thoughts and questions and ideas are very welcome. Let me tell you that.
Did that answer your question, Lynn?
We're not exactly, because I think where I was going with it is, you know, there's UW did a research study and found, that the upper level kids needed more sleep, and
Yes.
and that waking up, and having class start early was difficult. So a lot of schools have gone to later start times, like a 9 a.m. start
Yes.
time. And I was wondering if we continue with an online program, if, that had been part of.
So for our high school students, for instance, our online programming, what time do their classes start?
Marianne, can you help me out with that?
So right now at high school, I believe they would start at 7:40.
Yeah. So is there really we have talked about this sort of thing before, and it was all about busing and this and that and whatever. And we have research that shows that. And we have attendance data that can show tardies and this and that. Then why are we staying in this old format when we might have better academic success with those high school students if we started their online courses at 9 o'clock?
That's a great thought, Sally, and that's definitely something we can take to our admin team. Since we are in an online learning environment, that is something we could bring to the table and definitely really look into and do. It's just when we would go back into a traditional model.
And this is my whole discussion about this whole thing but when we go back to our traditional model, maybe the traditional model has never worked for a whole lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we want to go back exactly like we always did things before? And these were some of the things that we've discussed before about, and it's something I brought up before about what time of the day do high school students start? And it was always around the adults. It was around the busing. It was around all the other things, not around what's best for kids. And so sometimes I get frustrated with this piece of it.
I think Olympia High School has a later start time for their high school and middle school.
They do.
And as we start working towards moving this direction, I think this will be a good conversation for us to have for sure. So probably a good place to put a pin in that one, because we're not going to be able to solve that tonight.
Not tonight. We have a lot of other things to worry about.
Yeah, budget, staffing, working with our important unions. I think those are going to be important focuses as we move forward. So final thoughts or questions? I know it's almost 7 o'clock. I think this is probably a good place to wrap up. All right. Go ahead, Dr. Apostle.
I would just like to thank the board for listening and for contributing to the discussion. I've already thanked the cabinet for their work. I believe that we need to make some decisions as soon as possible so that staff and parents and families know exactly where we're going and why. That's going to be very important.
And Alex, if I could just underline when it comes to the custodial staff and calling them back, if we did a January 25th, in order to meet the contract callback requirements, I would have to start calling them back no later than Monday. And so we really are up to a deadline when it comes to starting date.
But at this point in time, it's January 25th. But, hopefully after this discussion, there may be a different bent to it in terms of the staffing issue and vaccination and so on.
Yeah, I just want to make the point, I'm going to start calling staff back on Monday.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everyone that's worked really hard. I know that this report that you put together, the 40 plus pages, took a lot of time and thought, and I know there was a lot more work that went into it even prior to getting all of it on paper. So thank you for that. It was very helpful to have that ahead of time so that we could really focus in on questions and sort of big picture ideas here. So with that, if we have no more questions, I would entertain a motion to dismiss.
One more thing, please.
Sure.
I'm meeting tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock with cabinet to go through this plan in detail well, similar to what we did tonight with the board, with principals, K-12 principals, and that's at 8 o'clock. And then at 11 o'clock, we're meeting with the certificated and the classified union leadership to go through this plan so that we're all on the same page at this moment in time. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Seconded.
So we have a motion to adjourn the meeting in a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.